bought a boat. She's a 1974 Easterly 30. But before I give you the tour, let me tell you how and why I got here. I was a certified public accountant living in Eastern Oregon. All I did was work, and I wasn't happy, so I needed to shake things up. Reddit showed me this little documentary about a guy living on his sailboat in the Caribbean. A commenter linked to White Spot Pirates channel, and I thought, why don't I do that? And then another commenter showed just how cheap it could be to buy a sailboat, and I thought, you know what? Why don't I do this? They say if you're going to do something crazy like this, you should probably find out if you even like sailing before you go. So I found the nearest sailing club to me, which was the Columbia Basin Sailing Club. This is course correction, a Montgomery 17 owned by my good friend Jerry, who was an amazing teacher. He was thrilled to pass on his knowledge and get a new sailor interested in sailing. Plus, everything that he was teaching me matched up with what I was reading in Chapman's Seamanship and Piloting. So after learning a lot from Jerry, it was finally time to load up the car and head from Oregon to Florida, saying goodbye to my dad's cat before leaving. It was a 3,000-mile drive from Oregon to Florida, and I stopped in Boise and St. Louis to hang out with some old friends, and I stayed a couple extra days in St. Louis to avoid the first hurricane to touch down in Florida in 11 years. Finally, I made it to Daytona Beach and got to stay with these two really incredible people, Connie and Jim. They took me in and supported me through the buying process, and without them, it just would have been so much harder. So Connie and Jim, from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys so much. And then it was time to start looking at boats. The first one I looked at was this beautiful Bayfield 29 cutter. And despite having water in the bilge and gate valves everywhere, I eventually made an offer on this boat after looking at a couple of others. Unfortunately, due to the sliminess of the broker and the previous owner not willing to put the sails back up for the survey, I had to walk away from this one. Next, I looked at this Lippincott 30, which was a really neat boat, but needed a lot of work. Sadly, due to health reasons, the owner hadn't been able to look after it properly and hadn't touched it in 4 years. The motor didn't run, there was a rot in places that I just didn't want to deal with, and the sails were all tore up, so it's just more of a project than I wanted to take on. Then I looked at a Newport 28, and although there was really nothing wrong with it, I just wasn't in love with it. On an unrelated note, sometimes I have trouble finding what's right in front of me. And if I was a dipstick, where would I be?
Well, if you were a dipstick, you'd probably be one of my ex-boyfriends, but...
Next up was a Watkins 27, which I actually got to take for a sail. But much like the Newport, I just wasn't in love with it. And then I got to look at one of the coolest boats I've ever seen, an Aquarius 24 pilot cutter. And I was in love with this boat. Man, it was cool. But it needed a lot of work. The bowsprit wood was falling apart, the bumpkin and the back was falling apart, all of the port lights leaked, and to make matters worse, it had a Volvo Penta and it did not run. So this was, again, too much of a project for what I wanted to do. Next, I looked at a Columbia 299, and I made an offer on this boat, and the owner accepted the offer, and then while I was waiting for to do the sea trial, he sold it to somebody else, and didn't even tell me. So I was back to the search. And then a friend through the Halifax Sailing Association showed me this Erickson 29. And it was a little rough, but it seemed like it was a good base. And I made an offer on this right before Hurricane Matthew touched down, and this was over in Daytona. And while the boat survived the hurricane well enough, it did show me where a big ugly leak was. Well, not quite where the leak was. After the hurricane, I went to inspect the boat, and there was a puddle of water on the cabin sole. After doing a little digging, I found that there was a rotten bulkhead. And the problem was that with the Erickson, there's a liner that covers up, well, everything. So I had no clue where the water was coming in from. I suspect it was probably coming in from the mast step. and if it was, that's definitely something I didn't want to deal with. So I passed on this one and looked for more boats. And then I went and looked at this Ocean Voyager 26, which was a bit more of a project than I wanted, again, and it also had just no headroom. And then I went and looked at a Pearson Triton 28, which has a great reputation, but you know, this boat's getting 50 some years old, and it had some problems, and it was just tiny on the inside, so I passed on it too. So after looking at this one of the guys in the marina there knew of a Morgan 28 that was for sale. So we went and looked at that real quick, and I just wasn't into it. And I didn't really want the swing keel, you know. And that brings us back to my boat. So I looked at this boat while I was running away from Hurricane Matthew. And after looking at the Pearson Triton 28, I came and did the sea trial on this boat and went ahead and bought it. So you might recall some of my comments on the previous boats were not enough headroom, rotten bulkhead, or just too much of a project in general. Well, stay tuned for the upcoming videos as I tackle all those rotten bulkheads and projects that I'd hoped to avoid. Until then, enjoy the rest of the tour, and we'll see you next time.